Hi there, I'm Tillinghast, and this video is going to cover why I use raw files for portrait photography, and specifically how I develop portraits within Luminar using the raw develop feature. First, let's take a look at why I choose raw files versus JPEG. Raw files are similar to a film negative in that they contain a lot more information as no compression has happened to the file yet. Raw files have a greater bit depth for more accurate color and skin tones, and a more dynamic range of tones overall from your shadows to your highlights. So what this allows you to do is make changes to exposure and color balance without sacrificing quality. Now, the biggest difference you'll see with JPEG files is they are compressed and sharpened in camera, so this really limits what you can do later if you want to make changes. So let's jump into Luminar and get started. The first step for developing a portrait in Luminar is to load the Raw Develop filter, and you'll find that over here under the Add Filters button. So once we click Raw Develop, everything we need is going to load on the right-hand side, so I'm going to click out of this Filters catalog for now. Now I usually come to the Lens tab first, and here using the Distortion slider, I can fix any distortion that may be a result of using a wide-angle lens. Now in this case, this image was done just below 85 millimeters for the focal length, so we don't have any distortion to worry about. Going back to the Adjustment tab, this is where we're going to make the majority of our changes. The first adjustment I usually make is to color balance. Now in the case of this image, the skin tones are a little cool, so I'm going to slide the slider to the right to warm them up a bit. Now the next place I go is exposure, and on this portrait the skin tones are a little overexposed, so I'm going to bring the whole image down just a bit, and that's looking better already. Now I like to fine-tune my highlights and shadows first, and then I go back and add contrast as needed. Now I'm going to bring the highlights down just a little bit to balance the image out a little more, and I'm going to intensify the shadows. Now with shadows on portraits, when you have a nice shadow beneath the chin, the cheekbone, and here on the brow bones, I like to intensify it a bit because that's very flattering and just makes the subject look more photogenic. Now I'm going to come up to the contrast and bring it up just a little to make sure the overall image has pop. Now as a last touch, I want that black background in the back to be nice and inky, and that some light from the key light did fall on it, so I'm just going to darken it a little till it looks just right. Now that did affect the overall image, so I'm going to come up here and just bring the exposure back just a tiny bit. Now we can see our final adjustments here compared with where we started. And it's pretty amazing how quickly we were able to get to this point after just a few clicks. Now that we have our basic adjustments done, I'm going to magnify the image and see if there are any areas that need improvement in terms of tone and texture. I like to work at 50% magnification because this way I can really see the image well, but I'm not so zoomed in that I lose sight of how the overall portrait looks as I'm making adjustments. Now to work on skin texture, I go to the Tools menu and I load the Erase tool. Now, I like to think of this tool as erasing any distractions that may draw the viewer away from what I want them to focus on, and with this portrait I really want them to focus on the eyes and the subject's smile. Now using this brush tool, the first one that loads is Add, and that's what I want to use. I'm just going to touch the brush over each area that might be a little bit of a distraction. Now I'm looking for light spots in darker areas, dark spots in lighter areas. I can also use this a little, I'm enlarging the brush, and my shortcut for that is the right bracket. And when I want to make it small again, I use the left bracket. And I will touch here and there on wrinkles and anything else that I think the subject would want me to minimize. But it's important not to go overboard with this step. If you smooth people out too much, then they really don't look like themselves in the final image, and that's never the goal of a good portrait. And just a few more here. And I think I'll enlarge the brush using my right bracket and just touch on this spot, just a little. Okay, once satisfied, I'm going to click Done up here in the right-hand corner. And what's great about this tool is that it's going to load all these adjustments in a separate layer on top of the Develop layer, so I can not only lower the opacity and make it look more natural, but I can go back and make changes to the development layer underneath if I need to. So now I'm going to go back to full size, and looking at this adjustment layer here, I can take it off, and this is what it looked like before I made adjustments, and here it is after. Definitely an improvement. Now zooming in again, but not quite as much. At 25%, I take a look at whether or not the adjustments are a little strong. And I almost always pull this opacity slider back at least to 80 to 75%, because that way the adjustments are there, but they look really natural, and the person just looks slightly better than they look in real life. And that's always my goal with a good portrait. With the image magnified to 25% here, this is a good time to do the final edit, which is to apply a small amount of sharpening. So I'm going to go back over here to the raw develop layer, and I want the subject size to be intact sharp focus, so I'm going to slide clarity just a little to the right and keep an eye on the eyes until it looks good. And I can always come up here and do a before after, and looking at it this way I can definitely see the improved clarity on the right. Now reviewing this image full size, I'm happy with all my edits and I'm ready to save. Before I do that, I want to consider if I have other images in the same photo session that I could apply these filters to. If I do, I go down here to Save Filters Preset, and I create a custom preset, which I usually name after the person in the images. And this way I can apply it as a batch process to other files, or one at a time. I can use this as a starting point, and then a lot of the work is done for me. Otherwise, I like to always save these files in the Luminar native file format. And what that allows me to do is to come back and I can access the history palette and make changes to anything that I adjusted as I went along, and that can be really helpful if you decide that you want to change after the fact. So that is how I process raw photos, specifically portraits within Luminar, and I wish you happy editing.